My name is Susan McCallum. I was diagnosed with PBC in 1992 at the age of 38. There were no support groups at that time, and the available information on disease outcomes was bleak. My main goal was to live long enough to see my young children through high school. It was 20 years before I would meet another person with PBC, and I've had many ups and downs over the years, but I'm happy to report that I'm in better health today than I have been in years. Along the way, I've learned many things about living and living happily with this disease. I found that keeping a positive outlook, managing stress, guarding my thoughts, meditating, watching my diet, and engaging in regular exercise are key to living with PBC. And so, it is my very great honor today to introduce Dr. Puneeta Tandon, who will be telling us more about the impact of stress on chronic diseases and how meditation can help to relieve much of the anxiety and mental stress related to PBC.
Hi, everybody. That was a wonderful introduction, Susan. Thank you. So it's my honor to be here to present, and thank you, Gail, for the invitation, and thank you all for being here. As mentioned, I'm going to be talking about mediating the impact of stress and increasing well-being in chronic conditions like PBC. And I'm doing this with my transplant hepatologist hat, but also my health coach hat and my yoga teacher hat. So my disclosures are here. And in the next 30 minutes, we'll be talking about introducing some concepts: well-being, chronic disease distress, anxiety, depression, and acute and chronic stress. We'll talk about why interventions to manage these symptoms are important and an important part of whole person care. And then I'm going to spend half of the talk talking about the impact of non-pharmacological mind-body wellness interventions, which, as Andy mentioned, we don't really get a chance to talk about much in our classical medicine talks. So well-being, what is well-being? If I was to ask each one of you to kind of think about from 0 to 100 right now, 100 is absolutely feeling amazing, really high well-being. 0 is no well-being. Where would you rank yourselves right now in this moment? And that obviously depends upon many things, right, that come into that number. And so it's not only where you're at with your physical health, it's also your psychological health, what's going on with you socially and the people around you, what's happening with your occupation or your other community contributions, what's happening with your finances. So many, many things impact well-being. And when you have a chronic illness, chronic disease impacts well-being quite significantly. And so there's this concept called chronic disease distress. And I want to raise 2 points from this slide. One is that a diagnosis of depression or anxiety, so when you're actually diagnosed by a clinician with having these conditions, that's the tip of the iceberg of distress. So that's when you reach a certain level of subjective distress and a certain level of functional interference, that those symptoms are causing those problems. We know that in PBC and in other chronic conditions, depression and anxiety are about anywhere from 2 to 5 times more common than the general population. But more common is this concept called chronic disease distress, and that impacts about up to 50% of individuals who are living with a chronic condition. And that's distress around uncertainty, distress around needing to change your routine to cope with having a chronic illness, distress around not knowing what's going to happen to work, or impact on finances, impact on relationships. So a lot of other things come into that. We've heard a lot about what is it like to live with PBC, and of course you, more than anybody, would know what it's like to live with PBC. These are just a few of the quotes that we've gotten out of the few years of wellness programming and research that we've been doing. So we've got hundreds of quotes. These are a few selected ones. Fatigue really comes out as a huge theme, as we've heard today. In the second quote in the green on the bottom, sorry, I don't think we have a pointer. Fear, feeling alone, feeling tired, getting that brain fog that Dr. Swain was talking about, lots of uncertainties adding to the stress. Loss of energy reserves, the impact on mind and the impact on the emotions, and then, again, underlying anxiety. what is it like to live with PBC is summarized here. What is it like to live in society in general right now? And let's look at what Statistics Canada has to say about our population. So this is age 12 and over for this particular survey that was done in the last 7 years, looking at how many percent of the population reported that they were feeling their mental health was either fair or poor. And you can see that it's 5.9% in 2015, going all the way up to almost 12% in 2021, no doubt impacted in part by COVID. How many said, when they were asked about perceived life stress, that they felt either on most days really quite a bit stressed or extremely stressed? 1 in 5 people. Okay, so this is a common problem. This is data looking at, from the American Psychological Association, looking at stress in America. And so in people from the US, looking at how many adults saying that most days they're so stressed they can't function, up to 27%. And it gets better as we get older, the amount of stress to the point of not being able to function, but still that's alarming. And again, this was data from the COVID period, but I would say that much of this is continuing, unfortunately. And we know that stress can lead to challenges with making healthy choices. So, for example, in this data here again from the American Psychological Association, how many of those patients had experienced undesired weight changes? 60%. So either going up in their weight or down in their weight that was undesired for them. How many had been drinking more alcohol? And this has also been mentioned to cope with stress. And we're seeing this a lot. All of the practitioners who are here are unfortunately seeing at least double the number of admissions for alcohol-associated liver diseases. And again, so a consequence of in part, stress. So if all of this negative stuff happens with stress, why do we need stress? What is stress all about? And so this, I just want to introduce the concept of the acute stress response. This is a video, a short 1-second clip. My husband's a skydiver. Oh. And so that's me jumping out of a plane for the first time without anybody kind of attached to me during my skydiving training. And so this is why we need an acute stress response. This is a very appropriate time to trigger that fight or flight response. So absolutely scared out of my mind when I was jumping out of there, but needed that activation of my sympathetic nervous system, needed my body and my brain to really be absolutely ready for action. Didn't really need saliva, so my mouth obviously was dry, my muscles were tense, heart pumping faster, my breathing was fast and more shallow, and you really get a release of stress hormones. So you get cortisol released, you get adrenaline released, you get increase in inflammatory cytokines. Now the problem is that we're skydiving multiple times a day, and that's chronic stress. And so that stress response is being activated for many things. If you're around a medical appointment, being stuck in traffic, you have an argument at home, you have an argument at work, so you're activating that stress response over and over and over again and getting those damaging things that are supposed to be there for a short time to protect us, not for the whole day or for multiple times a day. And you'll see that little battery in the brain there. So it does just wear us out. It wears us out physically and it drains our battery mentally. Another definition of chronic stress, again from the Psychological Association, is these emotional and physiological reactions that occur in situations where our demands exceed our ability to cope. And so again, having a chronic condition being a demand on us. So it's so important to think about this whole person approach to care and to address these symptoms and know that this happens to really allow for well-being in individuals living with chronic disease. And it's for many reasons. One, from the societal point of view, it optimizes productivity in general, whether it be at work or community contributions. It optimizes satisfaction, like staggering numbers for lost work productivity due to anxiety and depression in the US, $1 trillion per year because of anxiety, depression. We live better lives. We're more mentally and physically well, improved quality of life. And really important in chronic illnesses, we've learned that there's lots of medications and there's lots of non-pharmacological things that we need to do if we have a chronic condition. So exercise, nutrition, other habits. And so without a fully charged battery, it's harder to actually do those healthy habits and meet those things. Adherence to exercise and nutrition is not easy, and I just want to show you some data from a large cirrhosis study. This is the largest one done in patients with cirrhosis. 83 patients, 12 weeks of home-based exercise, 14% of patients were actually adherent to the intervention, meaning they did the exercise routine. And not surprisingly, there was no change in outcomes with that. Okay, so to get benefit from medications, to get benefit from these non-pharmacological interventions, we do need to do that, and that was the point of the editorial that we followed this with. It's also important to have a charged battery to be able to take your medications. So adherence to medications, I've looked at now multiple studies, very, very commonly coming in at about that 56%, 50 to 60% of patients reporting adherence. I don't have data specific to PBC. I suspect that you guys are much higher than that. But what predicts adherence? Things like information received, knowledge about the medication, improved quality of life. So all of those things, again, help us to really adhere to recommendations for medications as well as for non-pharmacological therapy. What else can we do to balance this demands and ability to cope? And there's many things. We've heard a lot about disease optimization, which is key. If you have better controlled disease, you will feel better. You will be mentally and physically more well. So that is absolutely crucial. Symptom management, we've had excellent talks about that. Directly addressing socioeconomic and external factors. If you don't have enough money to eat, if you don't have enough a place to live, those are clearly going to impact your well-being. Social support and community, and I just, again, a shout out to Gail and to Carol for the US part, but amazing to really have communities for individuals who are living with PBC to be able to feel supported. Disease education is crucial. And then other non-pharmacological therapies, which we'll touch on: exercise, nutrition, psychological interventions, and mind-body interventions. So alongside a lot of people, including my research team members, other allied professionals, patient partners, we've created a wellness program, which people have been referring to, called Empower. And this is the latest version of it. It's gone through several iterations now, but it combines three different things. One is a psychology type of program, which is based on something called acceptance commitment therapy, which you'll hear about. These are some of the topics. So looking at pacing, how do I make my energy last for the things that I actually want to do? How do I get to know who I am? How do I do self-compassion? Alongside mind-body practices like movement, breathing, meditations, and sleep practices, and alongside a third element, which is giving some tips about PBC and living with PBC from many of the experts in this room. These two characters, Michaela Watt and Emily Johnson, are here. They're part of my research team. Michaela's a medical student now, but she did a master's with me, and Emily's doing a PhD, and she's going to be going into med as well. So they have a talk tomorrow where they'll go through the research part of this in much more detail. But this is a bit of the path. We started actually with a 12-week study in inflammatory bowel disease, where we got a lot of good information and feedback from patients. I met Gail. Gail said, I need this in PBC. And then we went on to... Yeah, she was pretty forceful, actually. So, yeah. And then we went on to design it in PBC. So using a theoretically informed approach, working with patient partners, we went on to do a feasibility study, which you'll hear about in about 30 patients, which showed significant improvements. And then we've just finished a randomized control trial in 87 patients. So that will be hopefully published soon. And currently, we've gotten a CIHR grant to run this in what we're calling the Empower study in individuals who have PBC, but also those with cirrhosis and post-transplant. So other groups, expanding it out a little bit. And I won't show you the data from all of that. That'll be stealing their thunder for tomorrow. But this, I just want to show you, is individuals in that trial of 87 people with PBC who were adherent to what we had suggested. So doing the online program 3 days a week. So that was more than 50% of the individuals. And you can see significant reductions in anxiety and depression scores, as well as even improvements in fatigue. And the feedback, again, what Dr. Levy said, same for me. This is what makes me get up in the morning. So the feedback, and we do get some negative feedback and we get some positive feedback. So we take it all and we make it better. But things like patients recognizing that this is a study that encompasses the whole person, feeling more well-being, feeling like this radiates out to other people around them, improving their energy, improving their emotional regulation even within 2 weeks, evening meditations helping them to sleep, and then comments like it changed their life. So again, that's really gratifying. So in the last little bit, I just want to go through some of the science, because as Dr. Mason mentioned, we don't talk about this much, mind-body interventions. And these are health practices that use interactions between the brain, mind, and body and behavior to improve health and well-being. And just as a reminder, we're using a psychology-based intervention, so that's not meant to necessarily change symptoms, but more recognize how to live your best life. And then we're using that in combination with the mind-body type of interventions, which are hopefully going to help to change symptoms. So I'm going to start, hopefully if this video works, with a little short video from the psychologist team member to explain what acceptance and commitment therapy is about.
Acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, is an empirically validated intervention. It's been acknowledged by numerous societies and organizations to be effective. It's also transdiagnostic, and what that means is that it's been used to address numerous conditions and mental health disorders. There have been a number of meta-analyses and randomly controlled trials. You'll see over 1,000 RCTs and 425 meta-analyses, systematic reviews, and narrative reviews, demonstrating the effectiveness of ACT for a variety of conditions and disorders, ranging from things like psychosis and OCD to stress and procrastination. If I were to describe ACT to somebody like my mom, I would describe it as something that is a third wave intervention, meaning that it's a type of cognitive behavioral therapy, and it's the newest version of this. There have been 2 previous iterations of CBT, and this is the newest version. It includes all the effective parts of previous versions of CBT, and then adds some new elements that we've discovered have been effective, things like acceptance and mindfulness skills. One of the main differences is that instead of trying to change our thoughts, we try to gain skills to not get as caught up in thoughts. One of the key aspects about ACT is that our goal isn't necessarily to reduce symptoms. What we're aiming for is a vibrant, meaningful life. And that doesn't just mean happiness. We describe this as full catastrophe living, which means that life is full of pain and pleasure. You can't get joy without sorrow. They're 2 sides of the same coin. It's part of the ticket of admission for a meaningful life, is that it can also include pain. And so we're not trying to avoid negative feelings. Another way of thinking about this is, if there was a painting of your life, is it full of color? A fully lived life means that there's lots of emotions, not just so-called happiness. We're also not aiming for symptom reduction. Even though all the studies show that this is the impact of ACT, as we previously reviewed, the goal is to live a vibrant, purposeful life. One of the key skills that we're trying to cultivate is psychological flexibility. And this means that you can do a variety of different things. You have a large behavioral repertoire, so you can do things that are going to be effective and workable, both in the short term and the long term, to help you live a vibrant life.
Yeah, so Dana's been amazing, and she's created that whole 12-week program around acceptance and commitment therapy, which I think has really provided a lot of valuable, usable skills. Now, the other pieces of the program include movement, and in our first version of the program, we had one version of movement. We had just standing yoga, and participants were like, "I can't do that." So we've included now 5 different streams of movement, all the way ranging from a very low intensity kind of chair movement to a higher intensity chair movement, Tai Chi, standing yoga, and then yoga where you get to the floor. So really to meet everybody's needs, hopefully, around that. The program is not meant to be an exercise program. Exercise needs more supervision and more safety screening, but I would say that a lot of the activities are very much reminiscent of some of the exercise programming, like sitting, standing. You tend to do a lot of core work even with the programming that we have. Exercise is hands down the magic pill that hasn't been bottled. And there's so many adaptations that happen. Heart function improves, lung function improves, your blood vessels dilate more. You get peripheral adaptations. So in the brain, exercise studies galore have shown reductions in depression and anxiety, improvements in blood flow, reductions in age-related cognitive decline, as well as obviously improvements in muscle mass and the energy packets, the mitochondria increase in number and function. You get reductions in body fat, as well as increases in bone mineral density, which is so important, as was mentioned by Dr. Levy. And this review was done that we wrote was for individuals with cirrhosis. So in those people, you actually see reductions in pressure in the liver. This has already been shown by Dr. Coe, looking at the regimen that a UK group is doing, looking at home-based exercise in patients with refractory fatigue. They don't have their formal results published yet, but it looked like from their EASL reports that this is going to be a positive study for fatigue. And we've shown very similar for individuals who have cirrhosis. This was 19 patients back in 2014, not just PBC, but other individuals with cirrhosis, just to reflect to you how quickly this can change an individual's well-being. So these patients, if you looked at them, their biological age, meaning the age that is on your passport, was 57. But when we looked at them and did exercise testing on them, physiologically, functionally, they looked like 80-year-olds. After 8 weeks of exercise, they looked like 67-year-olds. Okay, so they had gone and they felt so much better. Fatigue reduced, not surprisingly. So I think exercise is something that really is an excellent part. Other movement that's in the program, just to show you that there are studies that have shown benefit. So this is, and I think the area is evolving, but definitely lots of positive signals. So studies of yoga showing reduced stress and exhaustion or fatigue, showing reductions in inflammation, and this is a systematic review that was done, showing for Tai Chi that your brain matter. So as we age, unfortunately, we lose brain cells, we lose gray matter. But these kinds of processes and movement practices can reduce that cognitive decline. And then improvements in perceived stress as well as heart rate variability, which you may have heard about. So it's the variability between the two beats, or your multiple heart rate beats, and that higher variability leads to better outcomes. We also cover a lot of breath work in the program, and this is something that can be done in 10 minutes a day, 10, 15 minutes. And what it does, instead of that fight or flight skydiving sympathetic nervous system response, it triggers the parasympathetic nervous system. So that's the opposite, that's the relaxed response. And it does it through, predominantly through the vagus nerve, although again, there's a lot to learn here. The vagus nerve is a big nerve that goes right through the diaphragm. And so with that, how can we activate it? Belly breathing is one of the classic practices that we teach in the program, and that activates the vagus nerve. The other one is sighing, or anything where you're breathing out longer than you're breathing in. So just taking a breath in and taking a breath out, doing that 3 times, you will stimulate your parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, so there's simple things that we can do. Randomized control trials are our highest level of evidence. This is looking at 2023 data on breath work. The studies are coming. So 6 of these 12 studies were after 2019, the majority of them with these slow breathwork practices, significant improvements in stress, anxiety, and depression. And from what Dr. Swain was telling us about the brain electrical activity, this looked at 15 participants, and they again got them to either breathe faster or breathe a little bit slower, and they looked and saw what happened to the connectivity, to the nerve connections in the brain. And the slower breathing pattern, this was 5 minutes that they did, actually resulted in a more connected network of those neural connections of brain activity across widespread brain areas. So again, we don't need a lot to start to change some of these things in the brain. And we can learn a lot from looking at long-term practitioners, and now we're moving into meditation. So what do the brains look like of long-term meditators? They definitely have enhanced connections in their brain, these neural networks, and their anatomy basically changes. So the majority of them will have increased what's called fractional anisotropy, and so more white matter fiber tracts are connected stronger, as well as increases in whole brain gray matter and volumes. What can we see from smaller studies? And again, this data hasn't been done in PBC, but it would be very interesting to do this. In smaller studies, actually, improvements in focus and memory with regular meditation has been seen within 2 weeks. You can start to see some neuroplastic changes, so increases in the volume of certain areas of the brain that focus on attention and working memory, as Dr. Swain went into, and decreases in other areas like the fear center or the amygdala. Okay, so that can be seen within about 8 weeks of regular practice. And this is a study that was done, I think, out of Stanford. It was 13 minutes of meditation every day for 8 weeks that showed significant benefits across these outcomes. So mood, emotional regulation, attention, and memory. Again, it doesn't take 2 hours a day. So it can get benefits in short amounts of time. Enhancing memory, reorganizing brain networks. Other studies have shown improving cognition or the way that you think, and then improving sleep. So there's practices that are meditations that can be done to improve sleep, and those have been shown again across multiple studies. So take-home points. I hope that I've been able to express to you that these things like chronic disease distress, stress, anxiety, and depression are common in individuals living with chronic conditions and in individuals living with primary biliary cholangitis. That there's many, many things that we need to think about, and I think you've heard so many great lectures today about disease optimization and symptom management. There are these other non-pharmacological approaches that we can use, and there's a growing evidence to support the impact of these mind-body interventions to reduce stress and improve mental health. You'll hear more about the Empower program tomorrow. This is just a QR code for that, and we'd obviously love you to be a part if you haven't been already. And I'm really grateful for your attention and to the people that I work with every day. Thank you.